My name is Fabian Bromovsky, and I think it falls to me to chair this session, although I am going to hand a lot of it over to my more learned colleagues. But I think most importantly, where we would have started this session, a few months ago, is a very different place than where I think we should begin today, because even in this very short space of time, a dialogue that we've been having with a group of landowners and many others over a matter of many months, maybe even a couple of years, has already kind of established its own dialogue, and what Michael Gove had to say today actually gives it an impetus that we would never have even dreamed of when we started out on this journey. Because the truth is that when we first started discussing the idea of sustainability metrics, it was pre-Brexit. So it was, in a sense, out of a kind of frustration with CAP, which said stop fighting it and start thinking about ways to farm in a better and a more sustainable way, find ways of measuring it and proving how that has environmental benefits that could be monetarized in the future. So we started from way, way back with a kind of idealistic idea among a group of land managers to try and work together to measure the impact that we were having on the environment and how we could show to people ways that you could produce food and increase, which has now become a good metaphor, environmental capital at the same time. But obviously events have overtaken us, and now the dialogue has moved so quickly in the direction that we had hoped it would go, that we are actually left with the problem that we started with and we faced along the way, which is in rhetoric, in vocabulary, it's a relatively straightforward concept, but in science and in keeping it simple and manageable, it's actually amazingly complex. And before I hand you over so that we look at some of the things that we've been looking at and why it is very complex, I think another really important idea that has come out of us all working together is that for a farmer on the ground, one of the biggest complexities in their lives is the inspection system. The inspection system has become one not of, as one of the last questions of this morning was, not of one of encouragement and learning, but of one of sort of punishment and fear. And that's not just government inspection, but it can be certification as well, because we hold out so much for getting the badge or getting the pass certificate. And what we were, if we move into a new regime in which we need to measure our performance in order to be rewarded for increasing natural capital or creating new markets or of improved environmental benefits, we want to think of ways that we can streamline and simplify that system so the energy behind it is about learning and encouragement and less about finding faults. So there's some of the ideas that I think we want to explore today, because I do think this session should be about questions and finding how all of us, who probably in this room have common purpose, can make it easy for government to find a way through this quagmire. I think I'm going to hand over to Patrick, who will give us a sense of where we've got to as a group in looking at the idea of measuring and using metrics to look at sustainability impacts.
Okay, thank you very much, Fabia. I would like to start by just explaining the context of how this initiative came about in a little bit more depth, because Fabia was actually largely responsible for it. She called a meeting at Wadston, which is the Wadston Farm, which is associated with the National Trust house, which many of you may have visited. The farm it's a large farm, over 3,000 acres, still managed in hand by the family, and the farming policy and practice there has been following the King's shilling, as it were, or should I say the Commission's euro, meaning that the best business case, they followed the best business case, and that ended up being to farm intensively and efficiently. So arguably the Wadston estate is one of the most efficiently managed, with pretty largely intensive farming techniques in the country. But over time, the continuous arable policy and the heavy inputs of chemicals and stuff was having an effect on the soil and also on the biodiversity. And facing this situation, Fabia and Edward, who's here as well, called a meeting of landowners and land managers to discuss how they might work more collaboratively to bring about a better situation. And that led by a series of sort of additional meetings to a conclusion that, first of all, that because this group included a pretty broad church, it was organic farmers, but it was also people right at the other end of this spectrum and some pretty large-scale landowners as well as some smaller landowners, to a conclusion that we needed to work together, and that many of the audits and certification schemes, and as well as the policy which is driving farming in the wrong direction, there were also a series of audits and certification schemes which we've been subjected to, all of us are subjected to, which were in some cases actually polarising us. So we came up with this wild idea: why don't we try to set about achieving some sort of convergence between the wide range of sustainability assessment tools, certification schemes and other data that we have to submit to governments that we're currently bound into, so that if the day came to pass, which it just did today, where the government is determined to reward farmers for increasing natural and social capital and doing the right thing by the environment, all the things that Michael Gove has just said, they would be able to measure, monitor and manage the change, and we would be too. So I thought the best way to describe what we've been at would be to show you the PowerPoint thing that we showed to Michael Gove when he came to Waddesdon, which was about a month ago. And this was just a farmers' roundtable meeting where he came for about an hour and a half, had a quick brief tour around the farm, and then we just sat around the table with him, some of the people who were there that day are in this room, and this is what we introduced. There's a lot of polarisation about what actually the impact of our farming practices on our farms over time is. And first and foremost, if we're going to try to farm in a more sustainable way, we need to measure what the impact is, and then we can manage it better. And there wasn't a unified tool for doing that. And this has resulted in a lack of policy focus. There's a duplication of effort, time, and farmers are all concerned. Personally, on our farm, I think we have at least 5 audits. So we're Red Tractor, Soil Association, BRC, because we make cheese and we sell cheese. And then we've got the Welsh Assembly government who ask us for loads of different data. None of them are organised in the same categories, and you get this enormous amount of overlap. And there's finally confusion in the marketplace. And just on the sustainability assessment tools marketplace, because it has become a marketplace, it's been estimated that there are more than 1,000 schemes out there for managing sustainability. And all of them are competing with each other in a way, and there's no unifying system which binds them all together. The people who are deriving this information from us all have a reason for doing it. I mean, the most obviously the one that we benefit most from is government, because they give us money in some cases. But the market people, the food businesses, even the certification schemes, first of all, they're in competition with each other, so they want to promote their own scheme against others. And secondly, in a way, they're using us because we're the source. I mean, we're where the data comes from. So we thought, well, if we took back control and tried to assess ourselves against the range of different schemes and do a sort of gap analysis on them, we could find a way of getting a converged framework. So that's what we did, and that's what it would enable farmers to continuously monitor. That's a management tool. Governments to assess and design public support payments. That's Michael Gove, hopefully tomorrow, and evaluate the impact. So let's supposing the biodiversity index or the sustainability index of the UK Farm PLC is at a very low level today. Well, if certain government initiatives are going to be introduced which are going to incentivise us to adopt practices which are more in the public interest, we need baseline data, and then we need to monitor the impact of the policy on the changes in our farms and our sustainability. So we need a common framework for that. Food companies could use the same data to make decisions about where they source, and then finally, citizens could understand that data if it was presented in the way maybe like white goods fridge labels, you know, where you have a AAA energy rating or whatever, in a consistent way. And then there's just one data input which could be shallow or deep, and it probably for some it would be deeper than others in different areas, and it would bring about a convergence and a unity in the whole thing. So we set up the working group, I've told you about that, and then 5 of us, I think it was, undertook a gap analysis of 4 of the leading sustainability assessment tools with the help of Organic Research Centre, and we were sort of monitored. So we used these tools on our own farms, and some of us were better at it than others, because like the farms are highly organised and had really good data, and some of us didn't. But we managed the process, and then ORC did a gap analysis looking at the outcomes of the data that we collected. And we also, along the road, we had several other meetings. I think we had more than 12 meetings altogether. We consulted with other stakeholders, quote unquote jargon, including food businesses, Nestle and Sainsbury's have been involved. Certifiers, obviously, we had a meeting of all the certifiers and most of them turned up. DEFRA themselves, we've had meetings with DEFRA, and actually we've had a meeting with the Treasury now, and research institutes, of course, of which ORC are one, and NGOs. And the idea was to use all this data to try to look at how we could develop an integrated framework for sustainability data, which combined the best features of all the existing tools. And by the way, I should say at this point, the Sustainable Food Trust had no interest or ambition to set up a scheme of our own. So in a way, we were just playing a catalytic role, and that was really important, because if some of the existing schemes saw us as a potential threat, who just wanted to sort of pick the brains of their schemes and all their experience and then just reinvent one of our own, that would be seen as unfair, and I think that would be right. So we merely wanted to do this to try to enable the emergence of this common framework. So here's the gap analysis. 4 assessments, 1,000 data entries. Over 50% of this data was already collected by government agencies in one form or another. So there's massive duplication of effort, and as we know as farmers, time, bureaucracy, headaches, etc. Here are the farms. Dalesford, Tim's going to speak about Dalesford in a minute. Cairnhead, Robert Craig, he was going to be here today, but he had some surgery on his back, so he couldn't be here. Wadston, and Edward Parsons is here, and Fager, of course. Fir Farm, is Fir Farm represented here? That's Paddy Horn, might be here later, and Jane Parker, and Bullchwanan, my farm. We wanted to have a horticultural farm in the study as well, but unfortunately my friend Peter Seger said no when he was asked if he would collaborate, which is regrettable, but we'll put that right next time. Then we thought, we were overwhelmed with all this data, and then we started the process of thinking, well, we have to categorise it at a high level and agree the areas where we could collect it under certain categories, which we came up with, and this took quite a bit of time to come up with this proposal. And anybody who knows about sustainability assessment tools, the devil is in the detail of this, because there are different ways of organising data, but these are the categories we came up with for discussion. We wanted to include profitability and yield, because the economic and physical output of farms is critical. It's all very well having a totally sustainable farm, but if it produces no food and no income for the farmer, that's a bit of a Pyrrhic victory. So we started with physical and financial data, and then we added, and if you think about this, and I think this is a really helpful way to do it, if you think about profit and loss, and you know that there's a universal framework for profit and loss accounting, and it includes balance sheet. So if you start with P&L, did we make a profit last year, yes or no, on our farm? Maybe we made a small loss, but then you should be able to adjust that loss for the impact on the stocks and flows of our farming practices on the environment. That might be climate change or something like that, or it might be natural or social capital. Did we lose soil fertility? Did we lose biodiversity? Did we shed labour, which is arguably a positive social externality? Then you can make an adjustment to the profits or losses, furnished with this information which you could monetise, but not everyone would want to monetise it, to get an adjusted true profit and loss. And this is very relevant to what Michael Gove was saying right at the end about capitalism and, you know, the growth economy. So if you have a profit of 100,000, but you've diminished biodiversity, soil, organic matter, fossil water, polluted the air, social and cultural impact was negative, used a lot of fossil fuel energy, your plant crop management was destructive or positive, your livestock management was good or bad, etc., and your nutrient management was leaky or fantastic, and you were practicing the circular economy, All that should be put into the system to look at a sustainability index which would reflect the impact of your farming system, which could then be used as an adjusted true cost or benefit of the farming system. And then it would be up to government to intervene, which is what the Prime Minister said actually when she first took office. She said, where there's a market failure, it's the responsibility of governments to intervene, to correct deficiencies in the system. Well, this is a classic case of market failure, because the market doesn't value all these externalities, positive or negative. As a result, we're getting a distorted view of the impact of our farming systems. So, how we're getting towards the end now. So, here's an example of, we started to produce a framework. So we started with each of the areas that you just saw, and then we looked at the key indicators, and then we looked at ways in which we can measure. This is just one which you can see, but there's a lot more depth of data here. And you look at how you would capture in maybe 5 metrics. If you take soil, how would you measure soil fertility outcomes? You can't have 1,000 measurements on a farm, it would just take forever, and we can't do that. But there may be some proxy measurements where you could capture through, say, soil organic matter or earthworm counts. Ian Boyd mentioned that yesterday at the meeting at Dalesford, or other critical measurements which would act as proxies for a lot more. And if somebody wanted to know a lot more about soil, then you would drill down to a 2nd level or a 3rd level. So we were only trying to capture the high level stuff and show how it could be done. Remember, we are not claiming this to be the definitive answer, because our view about how you measure these things, a classic example being soil organic matter, as many of you will know, there's a huge debate about whether it's possible to reliably measure soil organic matter outcomes of different farming practices. And there are new tools becoming available. There may be some very fancy ones released in the quite near future using satellite images and goodness knows what. At the moment, it may be that we have a tried and tested method, or 2 or 3 tried and tested methods, simply of measuring soil carbon by various means, and even that might not be reliable enough to tell DEFRA that our farm organic matter has increased by 2% over the last 5 years, in which case you might have to fall back to looking at the data which has been collected by research institutes on the typical soil carbon outcomes of many farms assessed under, say, organic farming, obvious example, or in different soil types, etc. So this is an evolving science, the way in which you capture the metric, you choose the metrics for capturing the sustainability, and then you can, obviously, monetize it if you want to, but that would be a 2nd stage, and I think monetization is a sister of that. And we produced this report, which some of you may have seen. I've got a few copies of The Hidden Costs of UK Food, which was Richard Young's effort to capture and monetize some of these mainly negative outcomes of our current farming systems without the benefit of having a framework of this kind. So I think we can take this work forward if we had a better framework. Recommendations to take things forward for DEFRA, to build on the work of our producer group and to create an expanded community of stakeholders. We're having a meeting tomorrow with food businesses to share this information with them, because obviously in the end, if food businesses use this kind of metrics as a means of assessing their priorities for purchase, that would be one very positive outcome. We also want the producer working group to share the draft framework and collaborate with DEFRA to use it as a data source for informing post-Brexit support, and that would come up in a multiple series of ways. And then for this to be linked with other departments of government, to the question that was raised towards the end of Michael Gove's question and answer, how, if he gets moved up or down or wherever he goes, how will all this work survive his departure? Well, the Natural Capital Committee has something to do with this, the number 10 policy unit, the Treasury, obviously, and the Department of Health, and all those things came up in the conversation we've just had. But the fundamental principle of this is that if we want to manage our farms in a more sustainable way, both individually and nationally, you can't manage what you don't measure. And certainly, governments are unlikely to reward farmers unless there's a reliable and consistent framework for measuring the outcomes of the different farming systems. So we feel that all we've done is prime the pump or set the stage for the beginning of a process which could certainly help us as individual farmers, saving time, money and unnecessary bureaucratic expense. But much more than that, perhaps even create a global framework for assessing sustainability in the same way that we have already a global framework for profit and loss accounting, which is used by all the international audit firms and everyone else. And if you could imagine that in the form of a biodiversity index, which would be a composite part of a sustainability assessment, maybe with different weightings, and that would all be for discussion, then that would be some achievement to come out of what for me has been a rather depressing year of Brexit discussions. So I think that's probably enough from me to set the stage. And then
I was actually asked to do this 2 days ago, so I haven't prepared a huge amount, you'll be glad to hear, but I will try and represent the working groups. Patrick, obviously one of those, but and Faber and Edward the second, Robert up in Cumbria, and Paddy and myself all sat round the room and tried to wade through 401 metrics that already exist, literally going through each one. No, actually we filtered that down to 5, didn't we? And went through the PG tools, SMART, and so on, and came up with those 1,000 data entry points. It was quite an exercise for a couple of days. So who was involved? Dalesford, we are a very mixed farm. I resent the fact you said there wasn't any horticulture representative. We've got 20 acres with six people employed on that farm.
You're too big to count.
Too big to count, yeah. But we also have a dairy, a beef, sheep, poultry enterprise up in Gloucestershire, Oxfordshire border. It's very important to recognise this is not just Patrick, myself and the organic side, very much through to an extremely commercial dairy operation in Cumbria that recognises the stresses on his system, recognises that his assets are not improving, and so he wants to measure that and work out how to improve. And then of course the Wadston story we've heard, and Paddy and Fir Farm and Jane Parker is going through that transition from quite an intensive system through to rebuilding the fertility lays and so on. And I'm quite proud to be wearing a tie and very shiny shoes for once in my life and a suit today. Being an organic farmer, there's not often that we get to dress up like this and go up the road. But I was invited by Stratton Parker to actually mingle amongst some of the industry up the road. And it's so important that we recognise the value of sustainable agriculture, not just at the top of the tree, but integrating it right through from the big producers in the east of England and the intensive dairies and so on, all the way through, because otherwise we're just going to go off on tangents and that's not going to help anyone. What we're doing has been highlighted very articulately, but it's that we set out to do the holy grail of change policy and make payments reward good practice, which we've heard a lot about today. The self-improvement was a huge thing for Dalesford. Now, Carol and Anthony are very, very strong business minds and know what they want. They want to be the most sustainable farm in the country. How the hell do you measure that? And it's sort of my job and Richard and Jez to try and deliver that. And unless you're looking at the whole spectrum of sustainability, you get wrapped up in just hitting the Soil Association audit or your packaging of how you're doing things. So that was really important for us. And whilst we did the 4 or 5 audits, it's like, damn it, our water is just, why are we consuming so much water? It's going to fix a few leaky pipes and so on. It really highlights that self-improvement. And then, of course, the efficiency of the audits, which we mentioned. And then why we're doing it, as I say, it's about focusing on our management practice, but also what hasn't really been highlighted yet is that idea of giving focus on our biodiversity and pollinators, or focus in our catchment water management, or focus in our soils. across space in the UK, across geographical space, but also in time. We're not going to achieve the holy grail of everyone going organic tomorrow. That's just not going to be happening. So let's pace ourselves. This isn't a 5-year plan. This is a framework that will go on for many governments to come, hopefully. So it's setting that benchmark. And then how we're going to do it, well, that's over to them and DEFRA, isn't it? I don't know. And that's to be discussed now, I think. But as Suzanne at the Organic Research Centre reminded me this morning, we've got to make it relevant to farmers. This was a farmer-led project. We've got to make it robust. It's got to be science-led. Now, we want as much data gathered in the field. We want to be counting the different bumblebee species or the different earthworms or the numbers of earthworms. But, that's not going to be possible for everything. So we've got to introduce some proxies, of which the certification schemes and so on already lend us a number of those already. And then we've got to be realistic. As I said, data gathering is not going to be feasible for every tiny little detail. And so the effort and the data gathering has to be realistic. That's enough from me, I think. Over to you.
Okay, so in a sense, we've given you a very, very broad picture of the background. And as I say, what's changed in a very, very short period of time, we've moved from what was an aspirational idea for a large group of land managers to do better and to somehow find a way to demonstrate how they were doing it better, to the potential to change the economic model for farming. In order to do that, we need forms of measure. And in order to establish forms of measure, we need a degree of consensus. As you say, it can't be done at every level. And I think that part of the reason for today is it can't all be led by DEFRA. What we've discovered in the last few months is actually they are for once listening. I think there are a lot of people, not myself, who have banged their head against the CAP discussions over many, 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 many years and not made a dent. And suddenly, the conversations that have been going on in lots of different places over many, many years are suddenly, we hear them back at ourselves today. But in order to do that, we, the farmers who will have to manage this in the long term, and it needs to be for the long term, need to help advise in a sensible way how we can bring that argument together and form a coherent sense of measure and metrics that is usable in the field. Something in Gove's speech this morning, which I think we should really hang on to on this, is we don't want to set a new false sense of certainty. What has dictated some of the issues of maybe the past 50 years is constantly coming up with new senses of certainty of what's right. And I think what we're trying to look for is a way that we can measure the impact of what we do, but be very flexible on how we achieve it. This is not about dictating method, but looking at ways to measure impact so that we can learn about method and be constantly learning how to do things better. So I think what we want to talk about today a little bit was, what are the barriers to achieving this? What are our concerns about the sense of direction that government are taking? And whether we have some questions
Great.
to do that. Okay, well I will start at the very back.
Hi, I'm Glenn. Patrick's been to the farms in Jersey, which I've been working on. I think Gove has actually opened up a huge potential for farmers, and that's carbon. Carbon is obviously carbon. Can you hear me? Sorry.
No.
Not.
I'll shout louder.
Yeah.
We're working with carbon. Carbon is the key to it all. As Patrick has alluded to quite a few times, and I congratulate you on your question earlier. I'd like to take it further in the sense that the UK, following through from the COP23 agreement, went on to the 4 per 1,000. What that means is they're committed to net zero emissions. The only factor that plays in this game is agriculture. So that's the only place where we can actually pull carbon out the atmosphere and put it into the ground using biodynamics, organic and all the rest of it. And again, it's just a matter of how do you measure it. Well, Dr. Elaine Ingham came over in like 2015 and he figured out how to actually calculate micro counts in the soil. And that's a huge part of the carbon loop. They're the microcarbon pumps, in effect. So working with the plants, then your microbes, that's how you fix solid carbon in the soil, or entune it, in a sense. So there's a huge opportunity where the government has actually committed now to offset carbon. You've got banks and things, we've got lots of them in Jersey, so it's quite a handy place to be. We've got corporate social responsibility funds, and if we could find a way of actually sharing the risk to transition from conventional to regenerative through those funds, that could be a way forward.
Do you want to?
Did everybody manage to hear most of that? I'm not sure how to summarise that in the form of a question. Maybe your question is...
Should carbon be looked at more seriously?
Yes.
Yeah, so I guess that was my question to the Secretary of State, and he said yes, so that's encouraging. But I think maybe also related to your point, which is something which I think needs to come out of this discussion, is the question about, well, I'm an organic farmer, and I had quite a lot to do with the development of some aspects of the organic standards back in the 80s, the livestock standards in particular. The organic certification scheme, I don't intend to give up being organically certified, but it does give me a yes-no decision after a long process of interrogation and a lot of decisions which sometimes are not directly related to data, which is not, it's just the result of what's happened. And I think that one of the consequences of this, you are organic or you're not organic, and this I'm speaking now of my own personal frustration, is every year I'm inspected by the Soil Association. The process is long and arduous, and I think sometimes very nitpicking. And at the end of it, my main emotion is one of relief that we've got through another year and we're still certified organic. But if I'm really honest, the inspection doesn't tell me whether I've improved my nutrient cycling over last year, or my water handling, or my soil biodiversity quotient, or my soil organic matter, because I'm not measuring it, so I can't know. And what really I want to do is I want to have a more sustainable farming system than I did the year before. And I don't really want to demonise the people who just got a no decision or didn't even apply for organic. I would like to feel that they're all my brethren, brothers and sisters on the land, and we're all part of a bigger community, and we're all striving to be more sustainable. And it seems to me that unless we do that at scale and we get away from sort of sectarian divides in certification, we will never achieve the task of transforming agriculture. So your work on Jersey, which I don't fully understand, is relating to ways in which you can use starters, Laningham type starters, to improve the capacity of soils to build organic matter without necessarily being organic. And then in the earlier discussion I was in this morning, there was a discussion about pasture-fed livestock association. So both of those sets of data would inform metrics on this chart that we have, but they wouldn't mean that at the end of the day you were either organic or not organic or biodynamic or whatever it was. But at the same time, those data sets could be used to inform a certification decision. So you could say one data collection process, the Soil Association, BDA, Red Tractor, LEAP, whoever they were, came along, you presented them with your data, and they could then ask a series of supplementary questions, but they could use the data for a certification decision. And that would massively improve the efficiency and the clarity of the system and the goal of moving towards more sustainable practice, and I think unite the farming community. So that's just one perspective that sort of comes out of what you said.
I know Tim has something to say on this, but just a quick, just slightly different angle on what I think your question was as well. What this would demonstrate, and what Gove said today, is the new markets that we could create in land management and agriculture. Carbon being one of them. There is both government who has targets to meet, but there are also huge other industrial areas which have carbon to mitigate. So that's a whole new source of money that could come into agriculture and be used constructively both for carbon mitigation but also for food production. And it's not just carbon, you've got water, you've got clean water, there's huge costs in cleaning up water.
Yeah.
Creating internal markets, this is not new money, this is not asking government to put new money into agriculture, it's money that's already wasted within the systems that could be used. There's a huge one on health, I won't even go in there. There's enormous ones on infrastructure through flooding, management of land, increasing soil carbon, etc. So by identifying ways that we can all come together on measures, it means we can quantify and monetize in some way and actually create new markets outside as well as inside government.
You basically just said what I was going to say. Because that's, as I understood the question, is can we draw on what Michael Gove said this morning, using private sector as well? And I wanted to use an example that we've had at Dalesford in the last couple of months, working with Wild Oxfordshire have really catalysed this and taken the Even Load catchment as an example of a really dire river, where Thames Water have got some serious issues cleaning their pollution from the towns and villages, but they're trying to tackle it through diffuse pollution on farmland. And so we've applied with a number of landowners up the river to take the phosphate reduction plan and put it in place. But we've had to go through an application process to get that funding. It's all funded through Thames Water. And then I very gladly received, when I got back to my desk in the new year, another letter from the Environment Agency saying that there's quite a large sum to rehabilitate the River Even Load across our stretch as well, in combination with a number of other partners on the catchment. And what this framework will do, whilst you've got that private focus, private money focus in some areas, you've got a framework that you can bring together. What are those measures that we're looking to achieve, bringing together the data, and then potentially roll it out. And you can give focus in certain areas without being too prescriptive, because every farm's different, every field is different within a farm, every county is different, and so on. So it gives the flexibility, and you can incorporate private money as well.
Really, 2 points I want to make, actually. The first one is about regenerative systems, and to point out and to ask what you think about this, about one of the most important features of the organic system is its prohibition of the use of external nitrogen. And as I see it, after 30, 40 years of working within this area, prohibition of artificial nitrogen is the key driver to good sustainability. So although you may criticise the standards and the certification scheme that is implicit in the organic label, it is a system definition that crucially has all of the spillover effects that you're interested in. So in a sense, you're trying to sort of catch up with what we already know in a very complicated process, worthy effort indeed, and it's the sort of language Gove might understand, but it really is tying you up into knots, as I think you revealed already in what you briefly presented as the overview of the outcome of your work so far. But the real question I wanted to ask was, you included also social and public health and cultural benefits. And the question I want to ask you is, how much do you think farmers have any part to play in that? Because as your report has revealed, there's a huge hidden cost, roughly the same on the environmental side as there is on the public health side. But of course that's not within the power of farmers to do anything about. The poor diet we all collectively end up consuming, even if individually we think we don't. We're part of a system which continues to consume poor diets and lead to diabetes, heart disease and many other negative factors. Well, so what are farmers doing about that? Because you have social, cultural stuff in your framework, and yet I can't see what a farmer might do to be different, apart from perhaps to be a small grower producing real food for real people, which is largely vegetables. That's what I eat most of the time, and a little bit of meat. So what do you do as a farmer to make sure you excel in that feature critical for true sustainability, where you have no mandate? So 2 parts of the question. Lack of nitrogen is one of the key drivers. If you're not dealing with that up front, you're actually potentially throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And I see many people here who aspire to that system. The other one is, how do you deal with the public health benefits?
I'm going to what we've been discussing, and of course this is very early stages of looking at a new way of looking at these things, is it's not one system or the other.
But it is, it comes to nitrogen, it is.
Well,
okay, I'll let Patrick answer. It's about being able to measure impact across the board, everyone to be able to measure, the nitrogen users and the non-nitrogen users, so that you can measure improvement. But I think let's start with the point on nitrogen.
Well, I think the nitrogen, I'll answer the second point, I'll try to answer the second point as well. But I think just before I answer either of the posts, these are we questions. They're not us setting ourselves up as experts in the questions you're raising. They're a collective question for all of us, because this is what we need to unravel. But I think I can speak about the nitrogen issue. Because I was involved with banning the use of nitrogen fertiliser for an organic system all those years ago as part of the organic standards, we said, well, we've just got to outlaw it. And then it wasn't, then because there was a debate about Chilean nitrate and all that stuff, but basically the system excludes it. And there are huge beneficial consequences, as you said, from that. But more recently than that, much more recently, the European Nitrogen Directorate have assessment put together a study on the monetised damage that a tonne or a kilo of nitrogen fertiliser has on the environment and public health. Richard is much more expert than I am on the nitty-gritty of this, but the point is that Michael Gove or DEFRA officials are now actively considering taxing nitrogen fertiliser, actively considering introducing the concept of the polluter pays tax. And that would make it progressively less attractive financially for all farmers if they wanted to use any nitrogen fertiliser, but it wouldn't prohibit them from using it if they didn't want to go organic. So I think actually your example is excellent. It provides, if the data captures how much nitrogen we're using, and the reward system for DEFRA for post-Brexit support puts a value on that because it's been monetised, then the nitrogen tax could in some way relate, if it was really related to its true cost, it would be an enormous tax. No doubt it would be a political decision how big the tax was to start with. But it's giving you data upon which you can base government action. And then coexisting with that would be the organic system, where it says no nitrogen at all. And those of us that want to stay organic and not use any nitrogen, which would probably be a much larger number of people if nitrogen was taxed, would continue to do that. So I think what we've done in this rather back to the basics thing does embrace the point you've made about nitrogen. On the second point about the social externalities and the lack of the farmers' control over some of their practices on society as a whole, including public health, surely that's the point that DEFRA need more than anything else. They need data, and Michael Gove touched on it this morning, about the impact of the system, which is not entirely in the farmer's hands. But on the other hand, if the government was mindful of the cost to the National Health Service of some of the damaging practices, then that would give them information and science upon which to base decisions.
Just one supplementary, who has agency to prevent those negative impacts, do you think?
Society, surely in the end.
Just society. I'd say it's corporations and private businesses who choose to peddle bad food.
Well, I think that's rather a pejorative way to put it.
Deliberately so.
Well, I would like to defend Nestle, who spoke at the launch of our hidden cost of UK food, and defend Sainsbury and even Tesco. Basically, I want to.
That question.
No, well, I just want to say that what we need to do, and this is my version of the answer about the capitalism question, is if we can't abolish capitalism, which maybe some people in this room would wish to do, at least we can make it more honest. So at the moment, the best business case for Waddesdon has been to farm intensively if they want to maximise their profits. And the best business case with Nestle is to sell degraded and adulterated food from industrial agriculture in the form of processed products. But if we introduce some of these carrots and sticks and shift the financial advantage to farmers who adopt more sustainable practices, where government intervention will help create a better business case for doing better stuff, then food companies will follow. Because in the end, that's what they want to do. They want to make a profit. And at the moment, it's almost impossible for many food companies to, apart from the organic people, to sell food because of the pricing issue, which also came up this morning.
Tim, do you want to add anything to that?
Let me jump in. I just very quick. I mean, I'm not going to get embroiled in too much about the health. How do you quantify and how do you argue it? But we know there's been work by Newcastle University who's to say that we can't finally persuade the powers that be that there are health benefits from organic, and you could get a premium for producing it because of the health benefits it has on the consumer. The same applies to residues and so on. Public access and the benefits to the social environment. I'll stand up so I can carry my voice better. Just allowing access to your land, allowing your hedgerows to be cut around your footpaths. I was talking about it yesterday. Encouraging people to see what you're doing. Be proud of what you're doing. You've got breeding partridge on your land for the first time in 30 years. Be proud of it and share it, obviously sensitively, and then Open Farm Sunday, as was alluded to this morning, and those sorts of projects as well. Why shouldn't farmers be rewarded just as they are for protecting 2 metres of a side of a watercourse or whatever it might be?
But there was also Gove mentioned, which would cause a complete revolution if it happened, if everything that government procured had to meet a certain standard, if our schools and our hospitals and our prisons were the food procured, a massive amount of food procured in that area was had to meet certain standards, environmental standards of production, it would absolutely change the landscape. So it does have to have both big industry and government to make change in order to really impact.